What's up, gamers? It's Ed Park, aka Taugrim. I'm going to talk to you tonight about Guild Wars 2, and I had started a poll on Thursday night on a whim, just asking people out of 5 classes which one they would most like to see me play in Beta Weekend Event 3. So the 5 classes were Engineer, Mesmer, Necro, Ranger, and Thief. And I got 130 votes, and here's how the tallies came up. 44 for Mesmer, 31 for Thief, 29 for Engineer, 16 for Ranger, 10 for Necro. It's interesting that Mesmer was so far ahead. I would have expected Ranger and Thief to be the most popular, most requested class, but I think it's because something which Richie Procopio pointed out, Bog Otter, on Twitter, and Bog Otter said, you know, there really isn't anything like the Mesmer class in other games, you know, a true illusionist class, so it's something which has a lot of people excited. It's a very unique mechanic. So I spent time this weekend, once it became pretty clear that Mesmer was going to be the winner of the poll, to sit down with the talent calculator and really start thinking through the mechanics and what I might want to do, you know, for structured PvP with Mesmer class. Now, the Mesmer class has 2 basic mechanics. One is the illusion generation mechanic, and the second is the illusion shattering mechanic. So they can generate up to 3 illusions at a time. It's a first in, first out. So if you have 3 illusions out, when you generate a new one, it shifts the oldest one goes away. So you can have up to 3 at a time, and there's this constant kind of, you know, first in, first out, you know, conveyor belt that's going on here. So you have to manage, you know, which illusions you have out at any given time. And there are 2 different types of illusions. The first is a clone. When a clone is generated, it causes anyone targeting the Mesmer to drop target. And the clone looks identical as the Mesmer. It has the same player name. It has the same weapon at the time it was generated. Right now there's a telltale detail that you can tell that which is the Mesmer, which is the pet, because the actual player will have an icon, a class icon over their head when they target them, but ArenaNet's going to fix that. So anyway, clones are mainly there as a diversionary tactic. Like I said, the main thing is that they cause any players targeting the Mesmer to drop target, which is a huge advantage. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And the clones themselves do a little bit of DPS, but they're not particularly, they don't have much health, and they don't really do much damage. They're mainly there for distraction. The second type of illusion is called Phantasm. It works very differently. Phantasm is there, it's more beefy, has more HP, deals more meaningful damage than the clone. So it's more like a traditional pet in other games. Now in the case of both the clones and the illusions, they only last as long as the target that they were summoned for is alive, or, you know, they haven't been killed. Or, you know, that other mechanic I talked about, the shatter mechanic, they haven't been shattered. So you can use up to 4 different shatters on your illusions. It will destroy any, you know, the 0 to 3 illusions that you currently have out, or I should say 1 to 3 illusions you have out. You can shatter them for damage, confusion, daze, or for distortion. Distortion is an evade buff for the Mesmer. So here's the interesting thing, you know, I've been looking at the calculators and thinking about this. There's some really interesting things that you can do, you know, having your illusions out, and one really interesting thing is that you want to be selective about when you choose to shatter. So for example, the Phantasm abilities tend to have the longer cooldown because they, you know, create a very powerful pet. And so, you know, what you wouldn't want to do, for example, is to generate 2 Phantasms, you know, by burning long cooldown abilities and then immediately shatter them, because you just wiped out some good work and you're going to have to wait till those cooldowns are back up. So, you know, I think as far as efficiency of shattering, you'd want as much as possible to shatter when you have 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3 illusions that are clones, and then you can pop your Phantasms out and let them do some damage. So it'll be interesting too, because I haven't played a Mesmer in PvP, so I don't know to what extent it's worth using the different shatter effects. I see people using Mind Rack a lot. That's the one for damage, but I don't think other players are using the other ones as much. And again, I'll need to see the strength of the Phantasm relative to the benefit of shattering them, you know. So like I said, that's one area I think of skillful gameplay with the Mesmer, is managing your pets and determining when to shatter them. That'll be an important thing. And there are also some really interesting talents and traits available for the Mesmer. So one of them is the 15-pointer in the dueling tree. That's the second trait line in the calculator that buffs your crit chance and crit damage. At 15 points in, you get a passive trait that when you dodge roll, it'll pop out a clone. So, you know, you can, if you dodge roll twice, that's how much you can do with a full endurance bar. You popped out 2 clones. So you can, you know, in 2 ability uses, get some Mesmers popping up some clones, illusions popping up pretty quickly. And now I'll share the build that I'm thinking of playing next week later. Just to give a very brief summary, I'm planning on looking at a build which synergizes around popping out clones, illusions really heavily, and to have a 9% damage buff when I have 3 illusions out, and 9% damage mitigation when I have them out, as well as a run speed buff. And I'm going to see if I can get these illusions, in particular the phantasms, to generate any meaningful DPS. So we'll see. I haven't tested it yet. Now, the most interesting thing about the Mesmer class, and I think probably the reason why, honestly, why we haven't seen it in other games, is because it creates a really interesting design challenge. Okay, so because in most games, the only way that you can get someone to drop target on you is by using stealth, using like a roguelike stealth or vanish. In the case of the Mesmer, you actually have two mechanics that will drop target on you. One is you can go into stealth, two, you can pop out a clone. And like I said, if you talent or trait for it specifically, you can get pretty good, sustained clone generation, along with your phantasms. So you can keep popping them out. Every time you do that, generate a clone, your opponent drops target. So here's the problem, right? By doing this, by dropping target, I'm going to force my opponent or opponents to look in real time, make a determination which target, which one of the illusions is not an illusion, is actually me, and target me, start to attack me again. Right? But in the meanwhile, until they make that determination to target me, I can continue to cast on them. They can't target me. They can target one of my pets. I don't care, right? As long as they're not hitting me, it's all good. So what I'm curious to see is how ArenaNet's balancing this out. And so let me give you a scenario where this would be a balance problem. If you had a Mesmer where the damaging capabilities of the base class were pretty comparable with another class, right? And these two, the Mesmer and the other guy were fighting each other, where this would be a problem is, given if you assume that the DPS of the two opponents is relatively equal, I'm Mesmer and you're something else, and I can get you to drop target pretty frequently by using clones and using stealth, and still being able to DPS you, then what it does is it keeps my window of being able to DPS you very wide, while shortening your window of attacking me while you figure out where I am and which one is me, right? So. And I know some people will say, oh, it's not that hard, it doesn't take that much time, but if you drop a target, it takes a little bit of time. I don't care how good of a player, there's going to be an instant of time where you would have been able to attack if you didn't have a target drop, but instead there's a delay until you pick it up again and then you use your ability. Now, here's an interesting thing, like in some games, when you use an ability like, let's say, pop out an illusion, an equivalent like defensive ability or offensive ability, that's all you can do with that ability. Now, what's interesting in Guild Wars 2 is when I generate a Phantasm, for the most part, it's tied to an ability that already has other positive benefits for me. Like, it damages my target, it puts a debuff, it does something, right? And, in the case, I mentioned the dodge roll talent, I can dodge roll, which is generally a good thing for me because I'm evading, and plus pop out a clone, which is, an additional benefit. So, if I'm able to sustain my uptime on DPS while popping out clones, and causing my opponent to drop target, and also being able to stealth when I need to, that's going to create an issue in terms of balance if the damage for the Mesmer against the other classes is fairly comparable. Now, the problem is, if you assume, for example, that having clones is a strategic, it's a competitive advantage, right, in PvE or PvP, and you were to say, well, in PvP, we should maybe lower the Mesmer's damage. This is something which is very noticeable to the players over here, and they'll say, I feel underpowered, I don't do enough damage, So, I haven't played Mesmer. I'm going to check it out in BWE3, E3 and see, and see if this is truly a problem like I project it could be if the Mesmer's damage is made comparable to the other classes. And I know that damage isn't the only factor here. You have healing capability, you've got survivability, mobility, emergency cooldowns, you have crowd control, but the illusion mechanic is the one that jumps out at me because the clones tend to generate a lot of distraction noise and lower the downtime or shorten the window that people generally have to DPS their opponent because it's a forced target drop. And again, in many games, you don't have forced target drops. What you have is you can CC your opponent, you can silence them, root them, you can do things that can disrupt their ability to attack you. But in almost every game I've seen, there isn't a drop target, a forced drop target aside from the stealth mechanic. And Mesmers have both the stealth mechanic and they have the clone generation. So I'm really curious to play Mesmer now after doing some research about it. It sounds like a really dynamic, fun class, and I'm actually glad that you guys submitted votes and that it was almost 30% of the votes, because now I get to try it and see for myself. So if you've played Mesmer, I would love to hear your 2 cents on the video, so please post them in the comments. If you like this video, please like, favorite, subscribe, share it. To the extent I get interest in videos like this, I will continue to do topical videos on different games. Also, if you can think of a better name than TaugCast, please share it. I was thinking Taugrim Talks MMOs, Taugrim Talks Guild Wars 2, although that's a little too narrow in focus. Taugrim Talks Game Design. I don't know. Post good suggestions for show names, I'd really appreciate it. Take care. So let's talk about something very different, what I'm calling horizontal scaling. And instead of having the game designed around a vertical progression, what it is instead is about a horizontal progression where you broaden your capabilities. So, for example, every new character that's rolled is given a baseline set of abilities. So